Welcome to Darkwood Brew. It's great to have you with us. We are in our third week. Yeah, okay. We're in our third week of our series of Dwelling and Indwelling, the house that God built. And we have a special guest with us tonight to talk about humility. Her name is Rachel Hackenberg, and we're excited to have her with us. But our question that we're going to ask tonight of our narrative on Naaman, the healing of Naaman in 2 Kings, is what did it take for you to realize that you don't know it all?
You don't know it all?
I don't know it all.
I am astonished by that. This is revelation, breaking news at Darkwood Brew tonight. Wow.
So the question, we put it online and we asked people that question as well. And so tonight we're going to get into that question and talk about that as soon as we go check to see what it is that got us this far in the house that God built.
My legs follow you.
It's not like God flashes neon signs and says, here's what it means to be in relationship with me, and here's where I'm calling you. Just look over to the flashing dot, or something like that. Follow the bouncing ball, and there's your path.
Maybe part of the lesson of the story of Solomon is a lesson about learn to be true to that which you've been called into. Learn to be true to who you are and whose you are, however you tell that story.
And the decisions we make matter, and because they matter, it's really, really, really important that when we discover we've made a wrong decision, to acknowledge it, turn around, come back, and do a new thing. And what Yahweh proves throughout the whole Old Testament is that when you do that, things tend to go far better. That Yahweh is far more forgiving and loving than we ever imagined.
Our Newman Divina comes from 2 Kings chapter 5. Let's listen to our story.
Naaman, commander of the king of Aram. Thank you. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man in high favor with his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man, though a mighty warrior, suffered from leprosy. Now the Arameans, on one of their raids, had taken a young girl captive from the land of Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went in and told his Lord just what the girl from the land of Israel had said. And the king of Aram said, "Go then, and I will send along a letter to the king of Israel." He went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of garments. He brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you my servant Naaman, that you may cure him of his leprosy." When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to give death or life, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Just look and see how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me." But when Elisha, the man of God, heard the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent a messenger to the king. "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me, that he may learn that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and halted at the entrance of Elijah's house. Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean." But Naaman became angry and went away, saying, "I thought that for me he would surely come out and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and would wave his hand over the spot and cure the leprosy." Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?" He turned and went away in a rage. But his servants approached and said to him, "Father, if the prophet had commanded you to do something difficult, would you not have done it? How much more when all he said to you was, 'Wash and be clean'?" So he went down and immersed himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. His flesh was restored like the flesh of a young boy, and he was clean.
Rachel Hackenberg is here with us to discuss the story about the healing of Naaman. Welcome, Rachel.
It's glad to be here.
Hey, I have something special that you gave us this week. We have your cookie recipe. What do you call these?
The cookie recipe, which is take your chocolate chip cookies and add anything else.
What's your favorite additive?
Nonpareils.
Oh,
wow.
that would be good. We don't have that in these. That's excellent. Well, these are very good. Thanks for sharing that with us. You know, we're collecting all these recipes and putting them together into a cookbook of sorts. So
fabulous.
Yeah, so you'll be mentioned in there. So great to have you with us. We're
I'm glad to
working
be here.
with the story of Elisha and Naaman, and we know it comes from 2 Kings, but we really don't know anything else about it. Can you give us some historical context to help us fit it into where it needs to be?
Sure, yeah. We don't know the precise years this happened because the king of Aram and the king of Israel isn't named, but we know that it's got to be around the mid-9th century, so 1850s roughly. And this is a time, it's kind of interesting that you have this interchange between the king of Aram and the king of Israel, because Aram and Israel did not always get along very well. In fact, there was just this huge history of skirmishes and out-and-out warfare, some occasional alliances that then get torn apart and so forth. So these are neighbors, but they're not happy neighbors at all. And so you have this interesting note, though, that Naaman, the military commander of Aram, has had all these victories by the hand of Yahweh. The narrator says that Yahweh actually was responsible for those. So that's just an interesting note in and of itself. This understanding that Yahweh is working in the midst of other nations. And according to Israelite belief at the time, they felt that really, ultimately, all the gods of the lands, they actually believed in the existence of other gods, but they felt that they could only ever serve Yahweh. So anything that was real about the other gods could only have come from Yahweh. And so one could kind of understand in that understanding how they could say, well, somebody who's worshiping a different god, it's ultimately Yahweh helped this person. So there is this kind of universality to Israelite religion in that time. And the other thing to note, though, is that because that conflictual relationship, I mean, getting a letter from the king of Aram to say, heal this leper, I mean, what's the king of Israel going to do? He's going to think, and he's sent money. He's sent the equivalent of, the silver, the equivalent would be 750 pounds of silver, 100 pounds of gold. So he sent this letter saying, heal my military commander, which is interesting in itself. Heal my military commander who may just be called to fight you. And of course, he's even heard that there's a prophet in the land because of skirmishes he's had, and they've somehow captured an Israelite woman anyway. Wow. And so you got this tension in the background, and says, heal this person. I hear I'm paying you money. The king of Israel can only think that this guy's setting him up for a war. He's not. How can we heal a leper? And so you can just imagine the stress. The why he's tearing his garments. He's very upset, but Elisha then kind of comes to the rescue. But the other interesting piece to note that it doesn't just jump out in the text is, we wonder why Naaman is so afraid of, bathing in the Jordan River. Well, if you've ever been to the land of Israel and you see the Jordan River, typically they'll take you to the place in the Jordan where they say Jesus was baptized, or this is the official place. Well, the official place is nowhere near where Jesus most likely would have been baptized. The official, what do we have up on the screen? Yeah. Okay, that's the official place. The water's nice and clean. There's a nice ramp down there. Even handicapped accessible. Everything. It's great, and it's right where the water's just running. It's near the Sea of Galilee, actually. But where Jesus most likely would have been baptized is far more typical of what the Jordan River looks like downstream, which is there. It's kind of this mud hole, kind of oversized, kind of drainage ditch. Really kind of ugly water. And so you can imagine Naaman like, you want me to wash 7 times in this cesspool? Are you kidding me?
He's already sick,
I can think of 10 different rivers. I could wash in. And it's also, that shows where, that's what that second picture is, where you'd likely envision John the Baptist baptizing. That picture comes from near where John was operating. So.
Well, Rachel, we're moving from dirty, ucky, mud hole rivers into a discussion that we had earlier in the week where the story of Humpty Dumpty came up, the children's story of Humpty Dumpty, and you said, oh, that would be a perfect inroad into this story. And I'm thinking, okay, Humpty Dumpty children's story and mud holes, what do they have in common?
Right.
And what do they have to do with humility?
So to start with Humpty Dumpty, you've got to take a leap of faith. We're going to take a leap of faith that it does relate, in fact, to Naaman taking a dip in the mud hole of Jordan. Right? So the rhyme, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. Right?
Right.
And thank you. I practiced.
Oh, good. You looked that up on your research, huh? Good.
So you get this impression I get this impression with Naaman sending this whole troop of, probably at least, I know it's just a letter, right? But it's a letter and it's 10 talents of silver and it's 6,000 shekels of gold and it's 10 cents of garments. And so there's this parade of people carrying things to the king of Israel saying, can you fix this? Can you fix Naaman? Right? All the king's horses troop in a line, all the king's men trooping in a line. And this it's a grand attempt to fix a problem. That Humpty Dumpty falls off a wall and all the king's horses and all the king's men come to attend to the event. And it has great modern parallels too, right? Because if there's a problem for us today, how do you fix it? Well, you find all your financial resources, for starters. You call up everyone you know with any connections. And this is how we accomplish things when there's a problem. So we know if there's a problem, if Humpty Dumpty falls down, if someone is sick, Ebola has us scared right now. So what are we doing? We're sending everyone in a big parade to Western Africa. Can we fix it? Right? Troop everyone there because we are very certain that a whole lot of power can fix problems. And we're very certain that a whole lot of financial wealth can fix problems. And so the king of Aram sends this whole parade of gifts to the king of Israel, or Naaman does, and says clearly this abundance of power and wealth means that we can solve this problem. So this is how we open doors to fix things, with money and with wealth. And so power is how you have a voice. And with money, you can buy yourself health and wealth and happiness. And in the situation of Humpty Dumpty, that's what everyone assumes. The king's horses, the king's men can fix this. And what's fascinating is not only can't they in the Humpty Dumpty rhyme, but the rhyme doesn't tell us what does.
Wow.
Right? If the world's currencies of wealth and power can't fix Humpty Dumpty, if the king of Israel can't fix Naaman, it begs the question, what else can? And what else does? And to answer that question, you've got to put yourself in the position of admitting that you don't know and being curious about the answer.
So you've got that's not going to happen easily, I wouldn't think. No.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't.
Maybe having some pressure behind that. Why you'd be curious? Why you'd have to admit, you don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you can dig your feet in for a while about not knowing.
Desperation does wonderful things for humility.
It really does.
Well, we have a couple of servants in this story as well. What role do they play in helping to move the plot along to a place where we get maybe a different answer to what we expect?
Right. And the servants are great counters. I mean, if the expectation is that big money and big big gifts to the people in power, if that can't solve things, then the counterpoint is servants who know the answer. I mean, it's the unexpected source for an answer. It's the servant girl who was kidnapped in a prior conflict, and it's the messenger of Elisha, who are the bearers of a solution, which of course it takes us several times to hear. It takes everyone several attempts to understand.
Yeah, the Naaman's servants are, and they're all the powerless, or at least on the relative scale, the powerless, and who are actually coming up with solutions. In the story, Naaman's servants, they're saying, "Hey, wait a minute, think twice about your reaction here." So they're actually bearing the word of the Lord, here as that Israelite woman who had been captured, as also Elisha. The prophetic tradition has this really mixed history with the kings of Israel too, and certainly that time the prophets were on the outs with the king of Israel, and so also Elisha is one of the powerless in comparison, to these people too. So all of the king's horses and all the king's men, and as Rachel's pointing out, all the things that the world expects will solve the problem, none of them do. Yeah. And all the things on the underside actually are what it takes to bring the problem to resolution.
And how they come into the story at all is by hearing the oral traditions about what the prophetic power is in Israel, right? So it's a storytelling for them that opens them to a new place of thinking how they might solve problems. And they actually get a chance, unexpectedly, to share that story with Naaman, right? So that's completely different source of wisdom than we saw last week in Solomon, right? Which was the king's wisdom that was spoken to benefit the community, and here we have the community that's speaking back to the king and helping to solve problems. So it's a completely different side of telling the story.
This one, it definitely takes a village.
Right.
Whereas last week it took a king.
Right.
Exactly. We were speaking last week about how they needed somebody to tell those stories to open up a new possibility for Solomon. Like David had Nathan, right? The week before that even. So these stories talk about, these narratives help us see that the source of wisdom comes from all over the place. And in this particular story, it comes from servants. So it's that open humility, right, that we're talking about on this pillar of humility that's helping to build God's house.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And their ability to tell that story, I think, is so powerful. Madeleine L'Engle, who wrote, A Wrinkle in Time among so many other books, talks about stories as being vessels of truth, even if they're fiction stories. It doesn't matter if the story is factual, stories can tell truth. And it's sometimes, what's great about a story is that it moves us, asks us, especially fiction, asks us to set aside what we are so certain we know, all that is factual around us, and to enter a space where something different can happen. On the pages of a book, anything can happen and you believe it. And so the servants tell this story and invite Naaman to set aside what he is certain is true, that the king of Israel can fix him if he just gives him enough money, and says, set that aside and hear the possibility that God works in a different way.
Yeah, it's really decentering the story. They're inviting Nathan to actually undermine his own story. We're formed by story. Even whether and they may be a lot of facts strung together that make up the story, but they may be facts that are off to the side of what's important too. There's kind of we when we have our identity, we have the story we tell ourselves. And some of those stories revolve around real facts, and some of them are important facts, some of them are unimportant facts, and some are just like things we've told ourselves and we've come to believe, but they have no basis in reality. Wow. And there is a sense in which we always have to kind of, as the poet David White says, cultivate a healthy relationship, a healthy conversation with uncertainty, because it causes us to re-question our story, take a look at it, shift our perspective, so we see our story and see, oh, well, that actually isn't so great, and maybe then expand our story, live into a higher sense of self, which is what the role of those servants are doing, is saying, hey, that story you tell yourself, it's blocking your healing right now. So why not take a step onto this, into this uncertainty, and down into humility, and let your story expand?
Well, we have all different levels of the story. We have the whole class level, where Naaman is a military leader and has all the privilege that comes with that, and he has servants that are helping to give him direction. And then he goes to Naaman, who's not the king, or to Elisha, who's not the king, and then Elisha doesn't even greet him at the door, right? So he's expecting a certain amount of how he should be treated. Right. He has to lay all that aside besides and take help from unexpected sources. So he has to admit that he's not right. He has to admit that he doesn't know the answer to this, and has to rely that somebody else does, and that they in fact can help him. That's laying aside an awful lot. Yeah. To create a whole new story, but he does it, right?
He does, and you're right, it's so hard to do that. It takes, we've from a whole lot of different influences come to believe, this is speaking in broad terms, we've come to believe that being certain is the best thing you can do. It's also sort of the grown-up thing you can do. And it takes a lot of self-confidence to hear a different possibility, to be open to information and opinion and perspective coming in from someone else. It takes a lot of self-confidence to hold on to humility and not and to be childlike in faith, right? I mean, that's really what it is, to say, oh, there's something else and I didn't know it.
I like the way you
just open ourselves up to that.
You just linked self-confidence. You have to have a lot of self-confidence to hold on to humility, which we tend to think are diametrically opposed to each other. But I think you're exactly right. They're actually, intertwined. This story is about, on the surface, it's about healing leprosy, but really it's also about pride versus humility. And in the Christian tradition, the number one of the 7 deadly sins, it's pride. And the number one lively virtue that kills pride is humility. But we tend to think of humility as being like this groveling, I'm going to self-abasement. I'm never going to ask anything of anybody, and I won't be confident and all this. And yet, you look at even just the word humility. It comes from the word. It's related to the word human, and both of them come from the word humus, which the Latin word humus, which is earth, terra firma, and we are taken from the humus, and to be humble means that you bow down, but only to that which is above the humus, to God. That God is the only one above the humus. So, literally, Moses in the Bible is referred to as the most humble person on earth. Moses.
Wow.
Moses is the one who doesn't ask, demands, let my people go before Pharaoh. I mean, talk about self-confidence, talking about, demanding stuff. But Moses is seen to be humble because he refuses to bow down before other people who are also of the earth. He only is going to bow down before God, from whom his strength comes.
So we need to reclaim this whole idea of humility. Rachel, your book that you've got coming out soon talks about reclaiming some of the old truths and giving them back the meaning and the flame that ignites the passion within some of those words. Humility is one of those things that we can reclaim, right? And maybe redefine for people, because I think our society is constantly telling us that humility is kind of a weakness, and it's not a place of strength that we should be acting out of. But here we see it's a source of confidence.
Right. There's a great, Catherine of Siena has this great meditation in which she says, I cannot lose. Well, she says, she starts by saying, we know nothing until we know everything. I have no object to defend, for all is of equal value to me. I cannot lose anything in this place of abundance I have found. If something my heart cherishes is taken away, I just say, Lord, what happened? And 100 more appear. And I just love that, because the humility has to be grounded in ultimately trusting God. What you were saying, Eric, that you bow down because there is something grander and something abundant. And if we lose something that we were certain of, we ourselves will not be lost. We are still well within God's care.
Yeah.
And so the new book sort of teases out what the things are that we feel so certain about in faith. What are the most familiar words and beliefs we've been holding on to in faith? And what happens if, instead of just knowing them, we're curious about them, and we play with them, and we find out where else God is inspiring us and teaching us.
So maybe we're thinking, maybe my story and your story is grander than I ever gave it credit for. Maybe if I let go of maybe the chances are that the story that I tell about myself and the story I tell about you is too small for either of us. It needs to be broken open, re-envisioned, and let God be telling more of that story, opening taking us into that uncertainty that then allows us to see a larger picture.
And if I have a bigger picture of you, then I'm much more likely to engage in conversation with you in order to receive whatever it is that you bring to the conversation, as well as letting me have part of the dialogue and the conversation as well. So there's that neighborliness is not what I bring to you as a good neighbor, but rather, am I open enough to go to you and ask for something, to admit that I don't have it all, or I don't know it all, or that's a whole different sense of neighborliness in the midst of that too. So it seems counterintuitive when we talk about humility in that way, but I think that's exactly what the pillar is that's holding up this way of being in God's house, this dwelling.
It's really, I think, an ultimate act of self-interest.
Yeah.
People think of humility as being like doing away with self-interest, but actually humility allows you to say, I don't know the whole story, and if you actually did know the whole story, you have this intuition that the story's bigger.
Yeah.
The story's bigger, and also you're going to get more of the story. If you're going to lord it over somebody, like if Nathan lorded it over his servants to the point where if they ever objected to him, they knew they'd get bashed on the head. How free would they have been to say, hey, idiot, wake up,
right?
Consider a different version of this story here. So Naaman himself, there's this suggestion in the story that Naaman himself, through humility with respect to his own servants, like giving them freedom to speak their minds, actually then, that's what heals them. So it's in his self-interest to be humble. It's in any of our self-interest to be humble.
Yeah. A completely different view of humility than when I came into this conversation, so that's good to hear. But Rachel, we're going to ask if you'll hang on just a minute while we gather some questions from our online community, and then we'll come back and have you answer some of those for us, because we'll expect those answers in all your humility.
Great.
Okay? So we'll be back in just a minute for the social media. We did ask the question of the Thorny Theological question online this week. What did it take for you to realize that you don't know it all? And we had an answer that I thought was really quite intriguing. It was from Katie Court, who wrote Writing to God. That was her answer. That's how she knew, or when she realized that she didn't know it all, is when she started writing to God. And she was literally opening herself up to receiving answers back from writing to God. So to be able to ask the questions, put yourself in a position where you're open to receiving answers, open to taking in things, and you're admitting that the other person has something to offer and that you don't have it all. I think that's it's a huge way to talk about how you build relationships. And I think not just with other people in a social situation, but also when you take a look at our environment, how we relate to the world, how we relate to God. All those things are much broader and much more focused when you come to them thinking they have something to offer.
Yeah.
So I was impressed with that answer. My particular answer was parenthood. That's all it took. You know you don't know it all when your kids tell you that all the time. And it's true, because they have a lot to offer too. So that would have been my answer for
That's
that
excellent.
question. Yeah. So it's always good to hear from the folks online. We have a Facebook page with Darkwood Brew. We also participate with the Narrative Lectionary Facebook page, and they have all kinds of good stuff up there. They have stories, they have graphics that you can be using during the series as you preach. You can be using them in small group discussions. There's a ton of stuff out there. So social media has been a great friend to us in this series. It's been good.
Yeah, it's fun also after a Sunday, because a lot of churches are using the narrative lectionary now, and on this Facebook page, there's a lot of clergy and lay leaders who are using it, and they'll also post like pictures of the sanctuary on the Sunday after the story's been told, and there's some fantastically creative stuff that's been out there. People showing photographs of recreation, the rainbow, and from the flood account, and just things with Solomon. It's really fun to see
the creativity is out there.
There's a lot of energy around this narrative lectionary.
And Marcia McPhee, who we're also partnering with on this series and all the narrative lectionary series, is out there with all of her resources as well. And there's a link on the Darkwood Brew website for that as well to go. She's got a ton of stuff, and she's got some ideas out there already for the Advent series. So if you're planning ahead, which, it's Advent, it's really not that far ahead now, you can go there and get some links. So Randy Sanders has been our chat administrator tonight. Randy, do we have a question from online?
We don't have any questions. I've been trying to get them to ask some questions. We've been having some discussion about the juxtaposing confidence and humility, and the pride versus humility, and there's been some good discussion on that tonight. So, but no questions to have popped up yet.
Well, we've just been doing such a good job answering them.
Yeah, that's what it is.
I guess so. Yeah.
Well, Rachel, one of the things you talked to me about earlier was the idea of how do you practice? What's a spiritual practice that involves humility? That would be my question to you. How does somebody practice humility?
So I think in a number of ways, I think one way to practice humility is to practice asking questions. If we're supposed to have faith like a child, the best question you can ask is that favorite 2-year-old question, why?
See, that parent thing been coming back. Yeah,
I'm telling you, it teaches you a lot for sure.
But
I think. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. It's okay. Go ahead.
Well, I was only going to say that I think we need to. This is why we ask why. I think we need to take faith seriously enough to keep asking questions. And not assume that it needs to fit neatly into what we can hold on to and be certain of, and take God seriously enough to not know and to interact with God. And some of the greats in the Bible ask God, how come? Why is it that way? And does it have to be? And I think that's a faith practice.
Yeah, there's that great story of Abraham
Right.
in Genesis, where God has decided to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because not because of the reasons why the people on TV tell you, it's because of injustice and unrighteousness, and God's like. You overhear God saying, should I let Abraham know beforehand or not? And said, no, I'm going to teach him. I'm going to let him know because he needs to know about justice and righteousness. And then God says, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham's taken aback and he says, well, what if there are 50 50 righteous. Would you destroy it then? And God says, no, I wouldn't destroy it. Well, then Abraham's like, well, what if there are 40? And God, no, I would. Well, what if there are 30? It just keeps on going, down the line, and it's just beautiful, beautiful kind of a narrative about our basic relationship with God. Is like, don't just simply take it at face value. In fact, God doesn't seem to be wanting Abraham to even take it at face value. I'm going to let him know in order that he may learn. And so in this kind of negotiation, Abraham is learning, about how God works. Yeah. And ultimately, if there's one good person, will you destroy it? No, but there isn't. So
it reminds me of that Monty Python clip that says, "No, we have to haggle."
Yeah, that's right.
You can't just let it be. You got to haggle.
Yeah.
Rachel, you got any final words on this?
There's the story of the woman who asks Jesus to heal her daughter. And he says, I'm not here for you. I think she's a Samaritan woman. I'm not here for you. And she says, how come?
Yeah.
Why don't I get part of this healing and part of the life that you say you represent and you embody? I think, this is not, again, there's a confidence in being humble before God and saying, tell me more and tell me why.
Yeah, and there's a deep sense of humility in challenging that too. It's because what causes us not to, if we disagree with some way we think God is working, if we don't challenge it, why? It's because we want to appear, we want to put on a front like we have more faith than we do.
Yeah.
We are more certain about, yes, I'm with the program than we are. And so it's actually an act of humility to say, hey, I don't get it here, And I think really God tries to provoke that in us if we don't kick back. I mean, you look at all the injustices of the world, are we really not meant to say, what the heck? Are we really going to say, oh, it's okay, I don't have any questions here?
Well, it is an act of humility to open up and listen actively to what the world is saying. So in answer to the thorny theological question now, when do you realize that you don't know it all, is when you actively engage in the life that you've been given, right? When you engage with the relationships that you have, when you open yourself up to listening to all of creation, how the world is working around you, then you enter into that story and you're able to open yourself up to that fairy tale, so to speak, like Humpty Dumpty, and be able to expect something that's different than what you were so certain about, like you were talking about in your book. So when you realize you don't know it all is when you engage with the world, I think. So Rachel, it's been a pleasure having you with us. Thank you so much for sharing your time.
It's been delightful. Thank you for
your
having
cookies,
me.
yeah. Exactly.
Thanks.
And your book is called?
The book is called Sacred Pause,
Okay.
A Creative Retreat for the Word-Weary Christian. It comes out in December.
Oh, fabulous. Well, we'll look forward to that then.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Good to be with you.